Everyday injustice. Too many wrongful convictions. Corruption has infected the criminal justice system, leaving too many people helpless, fighting for their lives. Instead of receiving justice, people suffer. Is that why they say justice is blind?
Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Injustice Podcast. I'm your host, David Greenwald. For the past 10 years, we've operated Vanguard Court Watches in California, including San Francisco, Sacramento, and Yolo counties. Our goal? Expose everyday court injustices, and now, more broadly, shine a spotlight on injustices in the entire criminal justice system, in the form of wrongful convictions, police and prosecutorial misconduct, and mass incarceration. This podcast hopes to take it a step further and highlight criminal justice reform on a national level.
Everyday injustice.
Today on Everyday Injustice, we have Marc Bookman back on our show, and we're going to be talking about the very fascinating and yet disturbing Andre Thomas case. Welcome back.
Thanks again for having me. I hope your viewers aren't getting bored of seeing me. It's a pleasure.
I'm sure not. And this stuff is just fascinating. I was just rereading actually your book and skimming through some stuff and came across the Andre Thomas case, which we've covered quite a bit because there have been some recent developments in that case. And I have to say, this is probably the most cringeworthy one that I've ever really focused on.
Yeah, the obvious physical issues are cringeworthy, but I don't know if there's any case, maybe ever, at least in the modern death penalty, where the intersections of severe mental illness and race go together. I mean, Andre Thomas is, you think of like a crossroads in like an old movie, and Andre Thomas is standing right in the middle of these two crossroads, and one of them is severe mental illness and the other one is, racial discrimination, and it's remarkable.
Yeah, so why don't we give background to the case for those who are not familiar with it?
Sure. So Andre Thomas has a lifetime of well-documented mental illness, severe mental illness, attempts to commit suicide, and he's constantly going in and seeking help from mental health professionals. He knows he's mentally ill. His background, his family genetics on both sides are also have a lot of severe mental illness in them. And Andre, when he becomes a young adult, Andre's a black man. He marries a white woman, which becomes important later. Has a mixed race child. Gets more and more mentally ill. At some point, he makes a determination to kill his wife and his mixed race child and her mixed race child from another relationship. He does it in a way that telecasts his mental illness. He uses 3 different knives. He's trying to remove the hearts of the victims with the 3 different knives. It turns out he gets 2 hearts and 1 lung, which he mistook for a heart. He takes the organs home with him in his pockets. He calls his in-laws to say that he believes he's in hell. And then he confesses to the police. Shortly after that, he leaves a dollar bill on the side of his wife's body at the crime scene. So all of these are, obvious indicators of some pretty serious, pretty severe mental illness. Then a few days after he's arrested, he's kind of ranting and raving and following the dictates of a biblical sentence from Matthew. He removes one of his eyes. The prosecutor, I guess, so the defense attorneys did a a very, very poor job of capturing his mental illness. For weeks before the crime, he had been walking around with duct tape on his mouth. I mean, you're talking about the kind of delusions and hallucinations that you'll periodically see from people kind of talking to themselves in the street almost. I mean, really profound. And the defense attorneys do a rotten job of bringing this information to the jury. They just don't do the necessary investigation. At the same time all that's happening, during the jury trial, there's a questionnaire that says, how do you feel about mixed race marriages? Because Andre kills his white wife. Three of the jurors who make it on and one alternate all say they are opposed or strongly opposed to mixed race marriages. The defense attorneys don't ask any questions about this at all. And there's other stuff that happens as well. There's something called a shuffle in Texas, where you walk to the jury panel. In this case, there were 5 or 6 African-American jurors in the front couple of rows, meaning that they're going to be questioned to be on the jury. In Texas, you can ask for a shuffle. And when they do a shuffle, all the jurors get jumbled up. And when they're done this shuffle, all the black jurors are no longer in the first couple of rows. So the jury ends up all white, as are all the lawyers and the judge. And they don't ask any questions from these jurors who are opposed to mixed race marriages. As the trial is concluding, the prosecutor, who has noticed, obviously, Andre Thomas has some white female friends that testify on his behalf as like character witnesses, sort of. And the prosecutor says to the jury, do you want this guy dating your daughter or your wife or your granddaughter? An obvious racist kind of call. And so, you've got this, like I said, severe mental illness crashing right into race discrimination. And the result is a death sentence for Andre Thomas. The story's not yet over, because the cringeworthy part is still to come. Some years after that, Andre, who is, the prosecutor seems to think he's malingering. God only knows how he could possibly think that, given his record of mental illness from early on. But 4 or 5 years later, Andre removes his other eye, and, trigger alert, I guess, for people to close their ears. After he removes his other eye, he eats it. So now he's blind, and he says he does this because the government was, I guess, spying on him or reading his thoughts, and because he ate his other eyeball, now they can't get to him that way. So years go by, he's on death row, he's blind, he's in the mental health facility of death row in Texas, what's called the Jester Institution, although they may have changed that name. But that doesn't stop Texas from, grinding the gears and trying to execute this guy. And that's moving forward. So that's the background.
So there's a lot to unpack here.
It sure is.
I think, this might be the understatement, but the most ludicrous part of all this ludicrousness, if that's even a word, is the malingering charge, right?
Yeah.
I was just eating my eyeball to fake you out, to make you believe that I am mentally ill, but I'm just kidding, really.
Yeah. The malingering charge is remarkable. And it's not just that he blinded himself. His documented record of severe mental illness is clear. He goes 2 days before this happens, he turns himself, basically goes to a mental health facility asking for help. But they, rather than kind of securing him, they go do their paperwork or whatever, and he just wanders off. there's a documentation from one doctor who says he is really crazy, like that, kind of using that kind of casual language that Andre really is. He's in the deep end of severe mental illness. So, it's one thing to say he's malingering just from blinding himself. It's another thing to ignore years of medical records that, he wasn't malingering 10 years before the crime. It's just, literally the prosecutor is blinding himself to the evidence.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't like a gray area case of, oh, okay, is this guy mentally ill? Is he competent to stand? I mean, it seems like, this is like the extreme of all extreme cases, and somehow this gets through the whole process.
Yeah, and it sure has gotten through the whole process. The Texas courts, the Fifth Circuit, the Supreme Court, with a strong dissent, but nonetheless, our courts are no longer a backstop for this. Now, there's still important litigation left in the sense that Andre Thomas really is not competent to be executed. And in addition to that, there's obviously a case for clemency. And I don't want to overestimate our courts or our clemency boards, but boy, if this one doesn't fit the bill, you might as well not even have clemency. No one is suggesting that Andre should be released back into the community. He's going to be. He's first of all, he's obviously no longer a danger to anybody except himself, and they're not asking for him to be released. They're asking for him to serve the rest of his life, in a secure mental hospital. I would imagine would be the appropriate result.
Seems like it. But how do we even get here? Because I mean, first of all, it seems like he shouldn't have been competent to even stand trial in the first place.
Yeah. So he is initially found incompetent, but here's how that works in the real world. They send someone, this happens all over the place. They send a mentally ill person to a mental hospital, and then they coach them for a month or two about answering questions so that you can be competent. What does the defense attorney do? What does the prosecutor do? What's the role of the judge? And they go through what's really kind of a teaching process to make the guy, just barely competent. And that's what happened in Andre Thomas's case. I blame the defense attorneys to a large extent here. The prosecutor's theory is that he was high on this cough medicine, Coricidin. They're ignoring his years and years of mental illness. And I think part of the reason they get away with ignoring it is that the defense attorneys don't do the necessary investigation to bring this, in front of the judge or the jury. So that's how they get around competency. They basically coach them to answer the questions correctly.
And did the defense not put on, psychiatrists to prove this guy, innocent by reason of insanity?
They make a minimal presentation. And then, of course, defense attorneys do this all the time. Rather than caring about the client, they care about themselves. And so they get up there and they explain why it was all a big strategy. They're not questioning these jurors about the racism because of strategy, and they're not bringing out certain evidence because of strategy. That's the classic excuse of defense attorneys who haven't really done the necessary work. And that's what happens here. And of course, the courts are looking very much the other way at any kind of relief.
I mean, for a judge to allow this to go forward seems irresponsible.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I agree. I don't have the highest regard for some judges. Look, the crime itself is awful, right? I mean, you're talking about a horrible crime where 3 people get killed, a mother and 2 children. And I don't take this the wrong way, because I find myself using the word blinded too often in this setting. But I think when a proper presentation doesn't get made, the courts and the juries can be blinded by the horror of the crime. It doesn't take much, though, to see that when you use 3 knives to remove the hearts of the 3 victims and then take the organs home in your pockets, there's something profoundly wrong with you. And he says he thought one of the victims was the Antichrist, another one was Jezebel, the third one was an evil spirit. I mean, he's not hiding his mental illness. It's there in plain sight for anybody to look. And then, of course, you've got this dollar bill. He's obsessed with the eye at the top of the dollar bill, at the top of that pyramid. And he's reading the Bible like a crazy person, and he's following the dictates of Matthew's. I can't remember the exact biblical phrase where, if your eye bother you from lack of righteousness or whatever, pull it out. He's somebody that was dangerous and needed to be in a secure mental hospital for many years now.
So we have a failure of the mental health system. We have ineffective defense. And then let's just add in racism here.
Yeah. Let me, before we get to that, let me just, I mean, it's interesting that you note the failure of the mental health system. This is a guy that regularly tried to get help, just couldn't get it. I mean, I'm not talking about after the crime. For years before the crime, he just was desperate to get some help and couldn't get it. So, all right, let's talk about the racism. I don't think it's an accident. I don't think anybody would think it's an accident when the prosecutor, does this shuffle, ends up with an all-white jury, a black defendant, and then says, you want this guy dating your daughter or your granddaughter? I mean, boy, that doesn't even qualify as code. And I don't know what the defense attorneys obviously thought that the interracial makeup of the case was significant enough to put in a question in the question. And then when they get these answers, some of the answers are, the children would be confused as to what race they're being raised in, and some other awful things that are said, opposing or strongly opposing interracial marriage. They go to the trouble of putting this question into the questionnaire. Then they don't even ask any questions to the jurors. It's bad lawyering 101. I mean, I don't even, some of this stuff, there is no explanation other than either they don't care or who knows what. Interestingly enough, David, there was an execution, I guess maybe a month ago now, or maybe just a couple of weeks ago in Texas, where a black on white crime, and one of the lawyers wrote in his notes, can you say lynching? Can you spell lynching? And then the other lawyer puts like a little triangle in there and writes justifiable above that. So the lawyers are writing in their notes, can you spell justifiable lynching? They're representing an African-American male who's charged with killing white people, and they're talking about justifiable lynching in Texas. Some of this stuff is really beyond the pale.
So when did this case happen?
So the Andre Thomas case, I should know this since I've written a lot about it, and I should let your viewers know I'm not Andre's lawyer. We never did get to that. I've written extensively about it in my book and in some essays, but I'm not his lawyer. I think it happened in the early 2000s, maybe 2005. I'm just estimating. I should know that, but somewhere in there.
So, I mean, there are a lot of interesting dynamics here. And of course, we know that the death penalty is disproportionately sought and then imposed when the victim is white, especially when, the perpetrator is Black. So there's that factor there. There's the fact that you had jurors expressing opposition to people of mixed race backgrounds marrying, which is this day and age that that's
Don't.
like a
But hold on,
regular
David.
occurrence now.
Let me interrupt you for 1 second because I don't want your listeners to think that this is I don't know if anybody our age thinks that 2005 is a long time ago, but just in case there are some young viewers out there, this not only is this not ancient history in 2005, Andre Thomas's case was affirmed by the Fifth Circuit last year, and a dissenting judge quoted Loving versus Virginia about miscegenation rules and interracial marriage. This isn't even 15 years old or 18 years old. This just happened last year. The court said this is okay last year. This is not ancient history in any way, shape, or form.
I mean, this whole thing is astonishing. And I think probably, I don't know if I want to say most astonishing in this case, but I mean, why is it that the system is reluctant to bounce the death penalty when it has so many reasons to do so that are easily justified?
Yeah, this is the human nature aspect of the death penalty and of kind of people, I would unwilling to admit mistakes. I mean, so I've written a lot and I've experienced a lot of prosecutors who get caught clearly kind of either making a big mistake or purposely hiding evidence, and they will never admit they're wrong. Cases where someone goes to prison for years and has a death sentence, and then you find the actual killer, right? DNA shows it's somebody else, and the prosecutor still won't admit there was a mistake. And so, there's this kind of, you've got this verdict, and prosecutors will go to their dying breath to protect the verdict, no matter how unjust it is. And I fear, this is what I fear most in this case, is that, as you say, there are so many reasons to say, okay, let's just put this guy in a secure facility. There's so many reasons to do that I fear the powers that be are getting their backs up and saying, you're not going to tell us what to do, right? I mean, it's a personal issue. It goes way past law or neutrality or just trying to look at the case, from both sides and make a just decision. It's personal. And that's the biggest fear, that the people that have power are so unwilling to see justice in any lens other than the way they always have.
But I can see that, for the prosecutor or even the trial judge, but the appellate courts?
Who do you think is sitting on the appellate courts? Every one of them's the former prosecutor, especially in Texas. I bet you I don't know the numbers. It would be an interesting study, but I can't imagine that a high percentage of judges in the Texas courts are not former prosecutors. I bet they are. Be a good,
I
be
mean,
a good law review article for somebody.
what's interesting to me is that this case goes on, and there's kind of almost an ahistorical disconnect here, because at the same time, we're seeing in the rest of the country like monumental progress in terms of death penalty. Last time I had you on, we talked a little bit about the Glossip case. What was really interesting, I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, but the Republican legislator who looked into this case said, this is so bad that we need to pause the death penalty here, because we have no ability to know whether or not we're executing innocent people. And this is Oklahoma, probably you could argue one of the 5 most, if not the most conservative state in the country, and a right-wing legislator saying, hey, wait a second, we got a problem here. And yet in Texas, with a case that just nobody would bat an eye if they threw out the death penalty in this case. Nobody. This one is so over the top that there is nobody that would say, oh, you're making a mistake, you're coddling this guy.
Right. I mean, and you're right that we're seeing, a decline in death sentences and in executions, across the country. Just in Pennsylvania, where I'm living, our governor just, announced that he's evolved on the death penalty. He used to be for it. He's looked carefully at it, and now he's no longer in favor of it. I think you're right that the closer you look at these things, the more unlikely you are to see the benefits to having a death penalty policy. But there is a kind of a crazy stick-to-itiveness to and like I said, it gets personal, where people just get their backs up and they feel the need to defend themselves somehow. I can't explain it. It's just a total inability to say, maybe we should reconsider this. There's no good. I wish I had a good answer. I really do.
Yeah, and this also gets back to what we were talking about last time. There just seems to be no fail-safe here, that you can't rely necessarily on anything to be able to come to the conclusion that there's no you can't put a stop to this stuff once the train left the station.
Yeah, there is a downhill inertia to this. Look, I'm still optimistic. Optimistic may be the wrong word, but Andre Thomas really is not competent to be executed. And so, if truth and justice are to prevail in any way, I'm hopeful about that, because, the evidence that he's incompetent is really very, very, very strong. I'm also, and this is easy for me to say because I'm not a Texas lawyer, I'm just optimistic that a clemency board would see this the right way. I mean, escorting this blind, crazy person to the gurney, it's beyond the pale to some extent. And I have to assume that fairer heads are going to prevail here somehow. I hope I'm not being naive.
So 2 weeks ago, it looks like, the judge basically withdrew the warrant for execution and ordered his defense to file an argument on or before July 5th. So that puts it out a few months. I mean, the problem is that you're kind of relying on somebody like Greg Abbott, the governor there, for clemency petition. I don't know if their Board of Pardons can independently do it, or if they have to do it in conjunction with the governor.
Yeah, I don't. I'm not an expert on clemency down there. I wouldn't want to say, and obviously Governor Abbott is a strong proponent of the death penalty, but that doesn't mean he can't. That doesn't mean he can't see justice here. I think anyone can, and I'm not. I'm not here to trash Governor Abbott. I think that he can see it just like anyone else can see it, and the continuation is simply that's to have a hearing on his mental illness, basically, right. And like I said, I'm cautiously optimistic about that as well.
Well, and I do think, the one thing that he does have going is that this has attracted enough attention now that, there's going to be some public pressure to go, oh, okay, we like the death penalty, but, this case, this is not like a gray area case.
Yeah, I fear the public pressure to some extent. You would think that would be a good thing, but the local prosecutors, they seem to be reveling in the negative publicity. It's like our whole. This is something that I think many of us are experiencing: life as a competition, as opposed to the justice system really shouldn't be a competition. But that over and over again, that's what I think it breaks down to. I'm on one side, you're on the other side. Let's just see who can win. And that's really not how it's supposed to be. And I think the local prosecutors are seeing this as some kind of a competition, as opposed to what's the just thing to do under all the circumstances. The justice system cannot be a competition, but more and more, I feel like that's what it becomes.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we will wrap up. Like I said at the outset, this is a bothersome case, and let me say at the end here, this was a horrible crime. I mean, let's not beat any bush. I know you mentioned that earlier. I mean, this is not defending. This is not a guy that's innocent. This is not a guy that did something that we could argue was anything less than horrific. But the vast amount of evidence is that this guy was never competent, was suffering from severe mental illness from the start, and at every step of the way, the system basically failed him.
Yeah, we also need to keep in mind, in most of the civilized world, the maximum punishment would be life in prison. So this case just cries out for that kind of a just result, not a parade down Main Street, just incarceration for the rest of his life and mental health treatment. And let's just hope that kind of justice prevails here.
This has been Everyday Injustice. We've been talking with Marc Bookman, and we've been talking about the Andre Thomas case and the death penalty execution that has been put off now, at least until July, and possibly longer, depending on what happens with the hearing. Join us again next time for more tales from the injustice system.
Thank you to George Powell and Norman Mousequake Barrett for the use of our opening Everyday Injustice. You can see more of George's music at www.justiceforgeorgepowell.com. That's Justice for George Powell, all one word, .com.